Great. So I'm very happy that Irene is here today to talk to us about crowdsourcing information in informal supply chains. Very much looking forward to your talk, Irene.
Thank you, Dorothea. Thank you for having me, and thank you for all of you for staying for the last day of the workshop and coming to my talk. I'm really excited to tell you about this new project with Joanne De Zeger on crowdsourcing information in informal supply chains. And this is ongoing work. Part of this, especially the experimental part that I'm going to be telling you about today is we haven't even started some of the experimental parts, so we're really open to any comments or feedback that you might have. Okay, so let's get started by talking about what are informal supply chains. And maybe if you're not in operations, you might also have the question, what are supply chains? So I've pulled this helpful definition for you from Wikipedia. Supply chain is a system of organizations, people, activities, information, and resources involved in moving a product or service from a supplier to a customer. So you should think I start out with some raw product. Today we'll be talking about palm fruit. And we're thinking about all the different parts of the chain that it has to go up in order to become palm oil, which is a widely distributed product. What is an informal supply chain? An informal supply chain is a supply chain where a lot of these links are created informally. And what this means is usually they're created through informal networks, they're created through word-of-mouth processes. As a result, a lot of these supply chains operate without the use of any written contracts or a digitization of transactions, and they also frequently operate without oversight or regulation because it's just really hard to regulate or monitor these kinds of informal interactions. Okay, so, well, why is this an issue? One big issue in informal supply chains is that information is not propagating well all the way down the chain. In particular, a lot of these people at the end of the supply chain are obtaining their information through these word-of-mouth informal processes. This results in very outdated or inaccurate information that they're then basing decisions that affect their entire livelihoods on this kind of information. So in particular, over 60% of global employment is sort of involved in these informal supply chains, labor in these informal supply chains. One example is smallholder farmers. Those are farmers who farm on less than 2 hectares of land, so that's less than 2 football fields. And they actually produce over 53% of global food calories. And that means they're probably even more than 53% of the workforce that's working on producing these calories because they're typically lower productivity. They're vulnerable populations. They have high risk of poverty. This is sort of their only source of income. And so it'd be really great if we could improve the efficiency of any part of the process, for example, the informational part of the process for these populations.
So but these smallholder farmers, they're not subsistence production, because then they wouldn't be part of the supply chain,
So a large number of them are subsistence production. In this, they sort of, I don't know the formal definition of subsistence, but I would.
I just try to understand. Yeah. If I just farm for myself. So if you're just farming for yourself, then you wouldn't be able to sell. But I don't know which proportion of these smallholders are primarily farming for themselves, but then have like a small amount on top of that. I don't know the split there. What information are you talking about?
I'll be more specific about a specific supply chain in a moment. Okay. On top of this, I also think there's a really great opportunity now. We have a lot of information technologies. Cell phones are ubiquitous in a lot of these settings. Even smartphones are becoming more and more used. And so this gives us an opportunity to think about and design ways to disseminate information to all of these people. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for really impactful work in this space.
Are you thinking about just disseminating information as a social planner, or actually incentivize somebody who's part of the supply chain to actually distribute this information?
Great question. So I'll answer all these questions in our specific setting. We have an actual information sharing platform that we have actually deployed in this setting. So let me describe all of that to you. What is our setting? Our setting is the palm fruit supply chain, and we're going to focus on the first mile of the supply chain that is located in a particular part of rural Indonesia. Why palm oil? Palm oil is one of the most widely produced vegetable oils worldwide. In 2018, there was global demand for 73 million tons of this. Just as a comparison, global demand for olive oil was 3 million tons. Global demand for canola oil was 30 million tons. So this is like order of magnitude more. Why is it so widely demanded? It's used in about 50% of packaged products, including chocolates, cosmetics, even toothpaste. A side note is that actually clearing land in order to farm for palm fruit is one of the leading causes of deforestation. And this is actually one of the primary reasons that my collaborator Joanne got interested in this setting. And so part of the hope is that in reducing inefficiencies in these supply chains, we will also somehow reduce the incentives to, just acquire more land in the hope that that will help you to make more money. And Joanne also does a lot of direct work in reducing deforestation and promoting sustainability in these supply chains. Happy to talk about any of that offline. Why Indonesia? Indonesia accounts for about 53% of global production of palm oil. That makes up a huge amount of their foreign exchange revenues. And on top of that, within Indonesia, smallholder farmers own or manage 40% of palm plantation area and comprise about 30% of their labor force. And so what we're really hoping is that increasing the efficiency of any part of the supply chain here will significantly improve the livelihood of subsistence farmers or just these smallholder farmers. And a lot of these farmers are also the people who, when they they find that they don't quite have enough, they're not quite generating enough income from their current farming practices, they just sort of illegally try to expand their farmland by deforesting what's nearby. And so we're hoping also to deal with that a little bit as well. So here's our setting, and here's what the supply chain looks like. We're going to be talking today just about the first mile of the supply chain. And so what is this? We have our smallholder farmers. They grow palm fruit, and then they sell the palm fruit to mills or processors at mills who sort of process this and do things to turn it into palm oil. Okay. And how this part of the supply chain works is that the farmers don't directly sell the fruit to the processors. They sell them to transportation middlemen who come and pick up their fruit, buy it off them, and then the transportation middlemen go and sell it to the mills. Okay, so every day what happens is the processors, the night before, the processors will set their prices. There's some kind of process by which they do this. And then they'll announce it to the middleman. This is the price I'm willing to pay tomorrow if you bring me palm fruit. And then the middleman will go and buy the fruit from the farmers in the morning and then go and transport and sell it at the processors in the evening. So this is how the process currently works.
Can I ask you a question about the harvest? I mean, how time constrained are you at that moment? I mean, is everything harvested at the same time and then you need the middleman to come quick, or?
Oh gosh, I have no idea. That's a good question. I don't know how the harvesting works for palm fruit. Yes. Joanne would probably know. Yes.
So I'm just wondering why we need to update prices. Is it like the demand fluctuates a lot, or like is it perishable product?
So the question is, why are the prices updating? The process via which the prices update is actually kind of opaque. There is supposed to be a set formula that's based off basically the price for crude palm oil, and that's fluctuating daily. And then there's meant to be some set formula that the mills then take that price, and I don't know. There's some formula that's not really being followed because essentially mills sort of look at, I'm trying to meet some quota over the past month. I didn't buy enough yesterday. Let me up my price today so more people come to me today. So there are these fluctuations.
Farmer, I have some supply. I don't like the price today. Can I wait like a week and maybe the prices go up and then I sell then?
The farmers typically don't do that because a week is a very long time for them.
Like next day?
Yeah. I'm not sure about next day, but I think also it's not so common. They just want to
But it's
have
not I have no idea.
No. So you shouldn't think of the good as perishable. You should think of the process as they want like a steady stream of income. So
And so they have very high, large discount factor, so they want to sell kind of quickly.
yeah, on the farmer side. Yeah. Let's say that. Great. Okay, so here is the supply chain that we're looking at. And let me just map it back to those characteristics of an informal supply chain that I described earlier. Information in the supply chain is actually created through word-of-mouth processes. So what happens is that the processes, they don't just post their prices. It's not that they decide on their price and announce it and everyone suddenly magically learns the prices. What happens is that each of these processors has a list of middlemen that they think are likely to come and sell to the processor. And then they contact just these middlemen and tell them the prices. Okay, and how this list is maintained is all very informal, and I'm not sure exactly how they do it. But essentially, there's a lot of information out there, but only a small group of people are receiving this information. And on top of that, it also has all these other characteristics. There are no written contracts. There's no record of transactions. There's very little oversight and regulation. And so what we're trying to do is we want to come in and we want to create a centralized platform for the middlemen to share price information and other information that affects their effective price with each other. Okay. So what we're doing in this platform is we set up a platform where the middlemen we're trying to crowdsource prices from the middlemen, right? Because each of the processors are sending price information to some set of middlemen. We want to crowdsource this information amongst the middlemen while shutting down we don't allow the processors to look at the prices offered by other processors. So we're trying to just look at the cooperation game between the middlemen while sort of shutting down any possible collusion between the processors. And the hope is that if we introduce this platform, then somehow the right people will get the right information. I'm not sure exactly what I mean by that right now, but hopefully we'll have a better sense later. And then the hope is also now that we have this one centralized platform that's collecting all this information and also collecting information on transactions, we'll be able to start to address these other issues as well.
This is voluntary information sharing? Like if I have a good relationship with a factory, maybe I don't want to tell everyone else that...
Yeah, this is a great question. And we actually deployed this platform, so it's interesting to see who uses it.
So, what if the middleman use your platform to collude?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's possible for the middleman to use our platform to collude. We haven't really thought through. First of all, we haven't observed it happening. The platform has been running for a year. We haven't observed the middleman colluding yet. And today we're going to take a non-cooperative framework. So we haven't really thought about it theoretically yet either. It's a good question. When we're designing such a platform, as I mentioned, we're going to be taking a non-cooperative game theory approach. The essence is that we have this information sharing platform where middlemen can share information with other middlemen. But really they have no incentive to do so, right? If you're sharing information with the other middlemen, you're basically just advantaging your competition. Okay, so even though in theory all the middlemen, I'm going to call them firms from now on, even though the firms like the idea of a crowdsourcing information platform, if we just put it out there in the wild, there's no reason for any of them to contribute information to this platform. Okay, so the high-level question we have here is, how do we incentivize information sharing between these competing firms? How we've actually done it in the past year that the platform has been operational is we pay them. We pay them some small amount for every piece of information, every transaction that they record on the platform. Now, the platform has grown a lot since we first deployed it, and so what this means is now every month we are paying out about $2,000 to various middlemen. So we're really, really eager to move to a stage where we incentivize information sharing without using money. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today.
So I'm sorry, but I haven't really understood what is why should the middleman use the platform except for getting money from you? But maybe you're going to talk about that in the model, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Because it's good. Thanks.
So what I'll talk about today, I'll spend a little more time actually talking about the setting because I want to talk about two parts of this work. The first part, which is very time intensive, very key to making this project happen, was data collection in the field. And so this was very important for them to extensively engage with the community in order to obtain what Joanne calls a social license to obtain data. Sort of build trust with the community, really understand what they are looking for, and also then that trust allows them to believe that such a platform is actually for their good and not just American researchers trying to exploit them. And using that, we're able to start thinking about what are the appropriate objectives and questions we should be asking in this setting. As part of this data collection, there are lots of surveys, one-on-one surveys, as well as very time-intensive manual data collection, so like driving through, collecting GPS coordinates, following the middlemen, recording their actual activities. And then based on that data collection, they identified this crowdsourcing information platform as something that the middlemen themselves really wanted and were really on board with, and actually deployed one. And then I'm also going to talk a little bit about the theory of how do we incentivize information sharing between competing firms without using money on one of these platforms. The key idea we're going to use is that there's some kind of repeated or stochastic game going on. So what we're going to do is we're going to pay for present sharing with future information. If you share today, you get to see tomorrow. That's the idea. And on top of that, what we do is we use partial information disclosure. Different middlemen may have different value for being shown this additional information. So what we do is we sometimes show you more and we sometimes show you less of what we have in order to balance the gains across all these competing middlemen and mitigate the effects of competition. So even though you sharing is helping your competitors, if you don't share and we revert to this equilibrium where nobody's sharing, actually everyone is doing worse.
And truthful.
And truthfulness is very important. We're not considered. We assume that reported prices are truthfully reported in this work, and how we're doing that in the actual platform is they can only log price data once they've actually transacted at the mill or the processor, and they have to upload their price receipt. And there's also, when we set up the platform, there are very strict rules. If you're caught uploading false information, you will be banned from the platform for 3 months. But that's a very interesting, it's not here, a very interesting question about truthfulness. I think there's room eventually maybe to think about other methods, maybe like peer grading, pre-prediction type methods, where you don't know the ground truth. We're not asking them for receipts anymore, and you want to compare what they're saying to what other people are saying in order to determine whether what they're saying is truthful. So I think there are some interesting directions there. If I have time, which I don't think I will, I'll also like to tell you a little bit about some field experiments that we're hoping to deploy later this year, which is basically testing these very theoretical policies that I'm going to be showing you today. Great. A quick slide on related literature. Of course, there's a huge and growing amount of literature on information sharing, disclosure, crowdsourcing, learning, so on and so forth in online platforms. There's been a number of really wonderful talks, even just here at Simons, in this workshop, in the past few workshops. And this is by no means an exhaustive survey of all of that work. On top of that, there's also been a growing amount of work on the impact of information in developing world markets. These papers over here, a majority of them are empirical papers where they deploy some kind of informational intervention in a developing world setting. And what they tend to find is that the welfare effects of these interventions can be mixed. But what they're unable to do is identify exactly what is driving these sort of welfare gains or losses. And so what we're able to do is, because we have very micro level data on our platform, we're hoping to tease out sort of who is gaining. Is it because they are gaining additional information? How valuable is this information to them? All of these kinds of questions. We're hoping to be able to collect enough data to answer those. On top of that, there's also a lot of even fairly old work on information sharing in supply chains or amongst competing agents. And we'll also be drawing a lot on ideas from repeated and stochastic games in designing our platform. Cool. Any questions before I tell you about the fieldwork? Yes.
Does the spatial distribution of farmers and middlemen and processors matter?
Good question. The question was about geography. Does the spatial distribution matter? Yes, it matters. What we're doing right now is this platform has been deployed just in one village. And so most of the middlemen and processors are fairly close together. You'll see, I'll show you some graph with some price dispersion. The max price is usually one of the processors is located a little more remotely than all the other ones. And so as a result of that, it increases its prices. And so we are also collecting, by we I mean Joanne and her field team, are also collecting data on sort of transportation costs and all of those, and hoping to use those in when we try to formulate the utilities. Yeah, so it's very important.
So I think in the development literature, there were those studies where people were using cell phones to exchange information on the price of grain, and that was reducing price distribution. Do you have the same kind of effects here?
We don't see that yet, but I believe that is likely to happen.
Okay.
Yeah, the reduction of price dispersion as a result of increased information transparency.
And that may have effects also if you take into account the capacity of those mills. That may have adverse effects or positive effects later on in the supply chain, right?
Yeah. So in this talk, we are not considering capacity constraints, in part because those are generally not an issue right now, but very relevant, yes, yeah. Sort of, what would the propagating effects of this be? Okay, great. So here's an overview of the large-scale fieldwork that Joanne and her team of 20-something field workers in Indonesia did. They spent 1.5 years collecting over 4,000 farmer surveys, also surveying the middlemen who were doing the transporting of the fruit, and also collecting just geographic data. Where are the processors located? What do the roads look like that these middlemen are driving across? One piece of this was establishing what are the connections between farmers and middlemen. So we mentioned before that a lot of the informational connections, the contracting, the business relationships are informal. People just sort of know the people they know. And so we wanted to take a look at who do people know initially, both between the farmers and the middlemen, and then between the middlemen and the processors. And so to establish farmer and middleman connections, they surveyed the farmers, they surveyed the middlemen, and then there's this interesting piece in the middle that is kind of coming out of this informal setting. What happens in this informal setting is that people have nicknames, right? And it's really hard to tell which nicknames refer to which people. Let me give you some examples. Okay, so here's what the farmer calls his middleman. He calls him, I can't pronounce Indonesian, but Paidi. Okay. But we also asked the middlemen in this survey the nicknames for themselves that were known to them. Here's what he gave us. Keling, Sijon, Pakitam, none of these seem to map to each other from what I can tell. And so there was quite a bit of field work that was done into just making sure that the connections between middlemen and farmers, middlemen and processors is done correctly. So this is just an interesting side note. We did the same thing for our middleman processor connections, and this was how we discovered that how the prices were being shared were via these SMS versus choose the selective list of middlemen, where the processor kind of, via some decision-making process, decides these are the people worth telling my prices to.
Can I ask you, so I think you had 38 middlemen. How many processors do you have in this village?
Right now, active on our app, we have 50-something processors.
50, 50?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but active on the app, we have, I think registered altogether, we have 200 and something middlemen. Active, maybe 80 a day.
And they all belong in the same village, so in principle, they could all transact with each other.
Yeah, so they're all roughly in like the same like cluster of like 1, 2, 3 villages. They're all really close. They're close enough that they could talk to each other, but they form these social networks and sort of stick with them. They don't talk to each other. Okay. And then I also mentioned that they very time-intensively went and tracked, followed middlemen along their routes and tried to get an insight into a day in the life of a middleman. What are the pain points? What are the bottlenecks in their processes? So through this, they were able to identify 2 first-order issues in this particular setting that the middlemen really wanted to have improved. The first was transportation logistics. So Joanne has separate work looking at sort of helping a middleman decide which are the optimal routes for them to take some kind of traveling salesman, but also with depending on the road conditions, which are highly varying because of weather, and they're not very good roads to begin with. But what we're talking about today is the other felt need, which was just there was this sense that there was more information out there than they were getting. And they thought it would be really valuable to get this additional information. So let me talk quickly about these 2 pictures. Here are the middlemen in the middle. They're anonymized, who we surveyed in this initial survey, well, some of them. And here are the processors that they were connected to. So here in the pink is the mill NHR, and there are 3 different processors at the mill NHR. And you can see that on average, every middleman is connected to maybe 2 and a bit processors, but together they're connected to a lot of different ones. And this is important because the prices at all of these processors can actually be quite different on any given day, even if they're at exactly the same mill, which means they're at basically the same location. So it seems like there could be, the middlemen could be obtaining better prices if they had access to this information. Okay, and so in response to that, Joanne and her team rolled out this app. You can go and download it on Google Play and even play with it if you speak Indonesian. It's called Pempem. Pem stands for Pembelak, I think, for buyer, and Pem something else for supplier. One moment. And what you can do on this app is you can see you go in, let's say I want to look at the prices at NHR. I can click NHR and then click through to the specific processors at NHR and share the price information. Or I can share other information. Right now, a few options are grading, weighing bridge calibration. That's if I bring X tons, they only paid me today for 0.9X tons, things like that. And so this is the kind of information that's being shared. Yes.
I had a question about the previous price plot. So it is. So I wonder whether, you're holding constant the fact that the processors are going to disclose those prices, and they're not going to change their price decision as a function of how much the middlemen talk. But if you go to full transparency, there may be a situation in which actually the response of the processors is to lower the prices for everybody.
Yeah.
Are you worried about that, or it's unlikely?
So far, we've talked about this a little. What we're trying to do, at least, is shut down any colluding between the processors And so if they're not able to see each other's prices, it's a little harder for them to do this.
Oh, but I'm thinking that if I am a processor, I may be more willing to offer a high price to a high-quality middleman and a low price to a...
Okay. I mean, the
Then they communicate, then I'll just offer
yeah,
something.
yeah. So the price I'm showing here is just, this is sort of like their max price. The grading is referring to how they rate the quality of the fruit you're bringing. And so if a low quality middleman brings, if a middleman brings low quality fruit, then the price will be adjusted to reflect that.
I see, okay.
So they're not worried about the quality of the middlemen who are arriving. So here's what they can do on the platform. This platform has been active since December of last year. There are now over 300 registered users, about 80 who are active every day. By active, I just mean they log in and they look at information. Now, how many of them actually share information? And there's about 50 of them who are sharing information every day. Every day there's about 50 who share information. Most of the middlemen are not using it every day because most of them are not working every day. There's a lot who do sort of a several days or weekly or every 2-week kind of cycle. And we have 55 active processors, and as I mentioned, we are paying everyone for what they share, just a flat fee.
This is in a specific area, or?
Yes, yeah, so that's...
That they're using
I don't think anyone outside this area has actually downloaded, what is the total number of middlemen in this area? That is a very good question. I do not know. I know that we have a lot more active processors that have been suggested. Ooh, okay, let me show you some results. Okay, great. Okay, so here's the setting, and let me show you some theoretical results. How can we design an information sharing platform that incentivizes information between these competing agents and doesn't use money to do so? Okay, here's a model. We're going to blitz through it. Here are all the pieces you need for the model. There are the firms. These are transportation middlemen, the firms. And here's the finite set of buyers. And we start out with some initial information. Okay, everyone has some initial volume, and they also have connections symbolized by these arrows with some of these buyers. And then they have some utilities, which I'm now going to specify for you. So how do these utilities come about? Here are the firms. Here are the buyers. We're in an infinite time horizon game. Every period, we draw the prices at each of the buyers. So we're just assuming the prices that the buyers are exogenously given, and they're drawn IID. They could be correlated with each other, but they're drawn IID over time from this distribution, F. The prices, and then middlemen see the prices, or firms see the prices for the buyers who they are connected to in their initial information set. On top of that, firms have utilities. It's basically just how much volume the firm is selling times the per unit profit. Okay. And the per unit profit takes into account both the price at the mill that they're selling to and also the cost of the transportation cost. Okay, and the firms are trying to maximize their expected discounted utility. Okay. How competition comes into play here is that these firms or the middlemen are effectively splitting the overall volume, which is all the fruit, all the farmers who are selling fruit. Okay, and we have this particular formulation. We say that how much of the market you are possessing depends on your previous time period's utility as well as your previous time period's volume. Okay, let me not go too much into this exact formulation. There are some parts of it that we need for technical reasons right now. There are some parts of it which we can relax in other ways, but then we have to put in new assumptions. Happy to talk offline. If you want to microfound it, you could, but I don't really believe this all that much, so let's keep going to the information sharing platform. So what is the platform doing? What we want to do is crowdsource market information from the firms. So what we do is we're essentially trying to increase the information set of each firm. And for the purposes of today, you should just think of this platform as some disclosure policy that can be committed to, okay, based on the history of prices, who shared what, when, which information to show which firms at every single time period. And then the strategy is based on the histories, whether to share or not share information in that period. This is probably the simplest strategies you can think of for the middlemen. What I'm going to say today also goes through if you allow for more complicated strategies. The timeline is, in every period, the firms arrive. Oh, I'm missing something. The prices are realized. The firms arrive and they see the prices in their information set. Then they share with the platform according to the policy. And then the platform takes that information and discloses to middlemen according to its policy. And then the middlemen take that information and go and sell. This notation, sigma s is everyone sharing every period. Sigma ns is nobody sharing any period.
So it sounds like you think that the price determination is a secondary issue here.
Yeah. So why? That's a good question.
The first thing I would think you
Yeah.
want with this, you want to share the version prices so as to affect the price.
Yeah, so we thought about that somewhat. I forget why we did think about it, but I forget why we went in this direction. Let me take that offline. Yeah. Sorry, no, that's a question I should have an answer for. Yeah, I don't quite remember. Okay, so here's some assumptions that we have. We have that the utilities are separable in the price and volume. We have bounded per unit profit. We want firms to sell to buyers that maximize profit. Here we're going to assume that all middlemen can gain from shared information. So there's no one who's holding on to a whole bunch of information but doesn't want any of the other information that's being shared. We can sort of work around that in the paper, and we're just going to assume that the total volume is 1. So what are our theoretical results? I'm just going to state them for you. I'm not going to have time to do anything else. Here are the main ideas. First main idea is that information sharing platforms with full disclosure induce complicated information sharing games. And so if you know the repeated games literature, essentially what we would like to have here is some kind of folk theorem, where we say that you can induce all sorts of strange strategies. You can induce a large set of equilibria through Grimm-Trader strategies. We can't quite get an exact folk theorem because there's all sorts of non-linearity going on here, but that's sort of the idea you should have in mind. You can get a lot of outcomes if you just put out this platform in the wild and let the middlemen themselves decide who gets to see what. And so the second main idea is once we have this platform, which we have complete control over and is the only source of information for people, then we can design how the platform discloses information in order to simplify this game. We can make it so that there are just two focal equilibria, either you're all sharing or you're all not sharing. And we can sort of select what we want the outcome to look like under the all sharing equilibrium. Okay. I had an example to walk you through sort of what are the main ideas that are going into this and what makes this different from a standard repeated games kind of problem. I'm definitely not going to have time to go through this example, but let me just highlight for you the key findings. So let's say we have this example. There are just 2 firms, there are 3 buyers, and they're connected in this way. So 1 is connected to 1, 2 is connected to 2, they're all connected to 3, and there's some correlated prices, some costs. Okay. In this particular setting, I've set it up exactly so that when there's no sharing, then the profits are symmetric between the 2 firms. In one realization of the world, one of them gets profit 2, the other gets profit 1, and the other realization every realization of the prices every period rather. In the other realization, if it's tails, the first gets 1 and the second gets 2. Okay, so it's exactly symmetric. We know what will happen. They'll sort of keep the same, they'll split the market share and have expected per period profit of 1.5. If only 2 shares, then obviously they do worse than not sharing because they're just giving valuable information to the other firm. And so in general, not sharing is going to be a subgame perfect Nash equilibrium. Okay, and what we really want to do is get out of this bad equilibrium and have people share. Okay, and so if we mandate sharing, then that's not going to help because I set it up in this particular example so that if everyone shares, 2 in any realization of prices is getting a higher profit than 1. 4 versus 2, 5 versus 4. Okay, and so if we do this, then you go through, you look at how the volumes evolve, and you see that eventually the middle firm 1 will more than have, so they'll have less than half of their original volume, which means that double the profits is not good enough to sort of compensate for this. Okay, but if we do this very complicated partial sharing, okay, 1 shares only when it's heads, 2 shares all the time, then all of a sudden everyone's profits have exactly doubled. Right, I've gone from 2-1 to 4-2, 1-2 to 1-2 to 2-4. Everyone's profits have exactly doubled, and so the volumes, or this competition for volumes, everyone's still going to exactly split the market, but now everyone's profit has doubled, so everyone is doing better off. So these are all the main ideas that we put together to get the following. The no sharing strategy is always a subgame perfect Nash equilibrium, but there's a Grimm trigger strategy profile where there's usually partial sharing that can be sustained as a subgame perfect Nash equilibrium, where everyone is doing better off. So their limiting utility is strictly higher for every moment. And so this is under full platform disclosure. This is just Thea's subgame perfect Nash equilibrium, and the question is, how do we get the one that we want? I had another example to show how we can do that. The main idea is that now the platform is basically playing the role of the Grimm trigger, right? If you don't play according to your strategy, the platform is going to shut down information sharing with you. Okay? And so now what all the middlemen have to do is they just have to share, and the platform is doing all the work, deciding who gets to see what. Okay, we're just taking the action from the middlemen and giving it to the platform. Okay, and so by doing this, what we can do is we can simplify the game. Here's the informal statement. If we use this kind of a Grimm trigger platform, then there are essentially only 2 payoff relevant Nash equilibria, one where everyone shares and one where nobody shares. Here's formally what that means. And we have a way for constructing these good equilibria. What we do is we balance the volumes, or the share of the market that people obtain. And so what that means is, well, first of all, everyone's welfare is going to improve, but then it also makes it incentive compatible for you to share. Because when you deviate and you go to this equilibrium where you get the same volume and you have less profit. Okay. And so we find a way to construct these. We construct a particular one where we're always showing to someone all the information. And we can show that this particular policy we've constructed is showing the most information possible, while still maintaining the balance of market shares. Okay, and so this is ongoing work. There are lots of questions you might be having. A big one that, yes, I should really talk to all of you offline and get your thoughts on is what does this do to prices? Yeah, related to that is sort of how do we think of collusion between the firms, between the buyers? Right now, in order to get this out there and running, what we're thinking about is how can we efficiently compute these? How do we observe the information we need to learn these functional forms, which we've just sort of specified in this way? Are there ways that we can be able to do approximately well without knowing exactly how the volumes and utilities are evolving, but by just observing how they evolve rather than having a model for how they evolve? And in our setting also, can we punish without having to punish forever? And in our setting, it seems like yes, because there are multiple people who have access to any single piece of information. Okay, I don't have time to tell you about the field experiment, but we do want to set up a field experiment. There are lots of things there. We're assuming middlemen are rational. Are there ways we can help them be more rational through the platform? We can give them price notifications or recommendations. In order to implement this GRIM trigger policy, we have this sort of token-based system that we're going to use. So you get a token for sharing that you can use in future periods. And this is important because middlemen are not coming to the platform every day. So there are lots of these little things that we have to think through in order to deploy. But I think I'm over time, so let me conclude.
Thank you. Question? Let's talk later. I think we are over time. So thank you very much, Irene, for the nice talk.